here. This is the third video in the series, and the last one where I'm going to be talking specifically about gameplay and not game design. So let's get right into it and talk about combat. If you look on the character sheet, you'll see something called endurance. Every creature or character in this world has an endurance score. For humans, the base score is 10. That's represented by these filled-in circles here. Now, that can be raised temporarily using certain magic or potions, things like that, in which case you can fill in extra circles with a pencil. And in some cases, you get a permanent boost depending on certain abilities. If you're a master in capoeira, for example, you'll get an extra point of resistance permanently, in which case you can fill that in with a pen and leave that there permanently. If you take damage, you can mark those in pencil as little X's. And if you take 10 damage, that's when your character goes unconscious. After that point, if you take any more damage, it goes into the critical damage slots underneath. And if you fill all 5 of those slots, you die. So it's a relatively forgiving system. You're going to go unconscious before you die, and so usually those people get knocked out of the battle. And unless the entire group dies, you rarely have characters killed in this system. That being said, there are creatures that are extremely dangerous that do 8 or more damage with one hit. There's creatures that do more than 15 with one hit. There are creatures that can kill a human by stepping on them, basically. It'd be like being stepped on by an elephant. You know, since the system really does try and be as realistic as possible and, you know, give a real sense of danger, we do use those kind of creatures, so there can be very dangerous situations there in terms of endurance. Next up are the defense scores, and we separate that into passive and active defense. Your passive defense is things like armor or magic protection. Those are things that will defend even if you're attacked from behind. And the active defense adds in a factor of your combat ability when you're fighting melee combat. So basically, if you get attacked long range, the modifier is going to be your passive defense, and if you get attacked close range, that will be your active defense, representing a bonus of being able to defend yourself with your weapon ability. For humans, those values can never go above 5, but certain creatures have much higher values, depending on their armor or their speed, things like that. One of the things that's very different about this system are the combat zones. Basically, and I'll use this example here, we have Francisco and EAMB on one side and these 2 lizards on the other side. And everyone starts basically in a free zone. And what happens is, as players attack each other, they form small combat zones. So those are close combat zones. And other characters can enter those zones or leave those zones. But if you leave a combat zone, all of the enemies get an opportunity attack against you. So in this case, let's say that Francisco decides to close distance with one of the lizards. That's going to form a combat zone in the middle. And let's say the other lizard has the next move. That lizard can either join that combat zone that's already been formed, or can choose to approach EAMB, the page here, and form a new combat zone. The person that takes the initiative to approach the enemy and form the zone loses the attack initiative. The enemy will attack them first in the next turn. So that seems maybe a bad idea to form a combat zone, but actually in many cases it's a strategic idea. And like in this example here, we have a page who uses magic. He's more of a support character. His defense is typically going to be 0 because he can't use armor and he can't use weapons. So many times someone is going to throw themselves in front. They'll use their initiative to engage the enemy before that enemy engages their support characters. I chose to use these combat zones as a way to really simplify combat. I didn't want to confuse young players with grids or anything like that. Once again, it's a very easy system. Everything here, like I say, normally I teach the basic system in 5 minutes when I'm playing with new players, and then when I get to the first combat, I teach them all of this in another 5 minutes. Now, getting down to the actual attacks, it's done exactly the same as any other action in the system. There are just two other things you need to take into account in this case. One is the defense of whoever you're attacking, and the other is what kind of attack you're using is going to decide the difficulty of the feat. So in this example here, you can see that Francisco, using a broadsword, and he's level 2 in blade weapons, which applies in this case, attacks a lizard who has an active defense of 2 using a basic melee attack, which would be an easy feat. And he rolls a 10. I keep using 10 in these examples because it's one of the numbers that comes up the most, 9 and 10, and when you're using 3d6 are the most common rolls, so I've been showing a pretty common case here. And so you add his level 2 gives you a bonus of 6, so that's 10 plus 6, but you need to subtract the active defense of the creature in this case because it's a melee attack. And you end up with 14 for the test. 14 is greater than 12, and it's a success. In contrast, if he had the same roll, and the only difference here is that he tried a strong attack instead of a regular melee attack, and the strong attack is a difficult feat, but it does extra damage. So he would roll a 10, once again, 10 plus 6 minus 2 equals 14, and 14 is less than a difficult feat, which is 18, and so that would be failure. In other words, which attack to use is a strategic decision based on your character's abilities, bonuses, the defense of your enemy, and I'll talk more about strategy and game design in another video. Here's a list of all the possible actions during combat. You have melee attack and then strong attack, which is a stronger version of the melee attack. And in the same fashion, we have ranged attack or precise attack, where a ranged attack is going to be an easy feat and a precise attack will be a difficult feat. And then we have assist attack, which is a good thing for support characters to use because that will allow them to give a bonus to someone who's attacking if they're not going to use powers or other things. And then there's protect. If you'd like to pass your part of your defensive bonus to someone else, you use protect. Disarm, to try and remove a weapon from an opponent. Grapple, to try and bring them down, disable them. There's defend yourself, which is another really useful thing for support characters to use because they normally have 0 defense or very low defense. Dodge is a special case of defend yourself when the character has acrobatics or abilities like that that allow them to make a more complex dodge. Approach the enemy is what I mentioned before, where you close the gap and form a combat zone. Move away from combat is where you leave a combat zone. Once again, you're going to suffer an opportunity attack from all the enemies if you take yourself out of a combat zone. Use skill allows you to use any skill your character possesses. One that's very common in combat is first aid. Reload, in the case of firearms, you have to take 1 or 2 rounds to reload depending on the firearm. So there, a lot of times those characters are going to be reloading, but those weapons do more damage to compensate. There's use item, in case you have any items that apply in combat. Escape, if you want to leave the field of battle. If you're in a free zone, you're not in a combat zone, you can try and escape completely from the battle. And surrender, if you want to lay down your weapons and see if the opponent will accept your surrender. Not really recommended when you're fighting monsters. All weapons do fixed damage. I show some of them here. Knife does 1 damage always. A harquebus, which is our firearm, will do 3 damage on every attack. A lot of people who are used to Dungeons & Dragons and other systems question why there's no extra roll for damage and say, oh, well, that's how you randomize damage. But the fact is the actual attack already randomizes damage. Either you hit or you miss, and over time, that's what randomizes the damage you do to the enemy. A second roll is a second randomization over the first. So once again, I always chose simplicity with this system. I wanted to make sure that every dice roll is always going to be a 3d6 dice roll, and it's always going to be against the abilities. And that's why the system is so easy to teach to someone, because it's always the same dice roll, and it's always the same bonuses and modifiers, and that's why it's really easy to use. So I wanted to keep the system very elegant and not add in a bunch of dice rolls. There's no saving throws, there's no damage rolls, there's no anything that is not a 3d6 test against abilities, and that's the way the system works. And I hope you enjoyed the videos. I hope you enjoyed the system. This is the last video on gameplay, and I will try and record one more video, but it's more about game design, how I designed the system, a little bit more about how 3D6 fits into all this and my design decisions. And I'll record that over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please support our Kickstarter project. We have 10 days left as I'm recording this, and we're over 50%, but we still have a ways to go. So thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.